was in seminary, I worked at a church in New York City the last 2 years that I was there. And so I would spend about half the week in Princeton and then half the week in New York. And I don't know about you, but I love New York City. I love New York City just on a random given weekend, but I especially love New York City during the month of December. There's something magical about Christmas in New York. The ice skating at Rockefeller Center and Central Park, going to the stores, walking up and down Fifth Avenue, attending the tree lighting services and the different worship services, the plays and the concerts, being in Times Square. There's just something magical about being in New York during the month of December. And I know lots of people will take an annual trip to New York just to be there during the Christmas season. The truth of the matter is, I love, and this is why I love being in New York, I love, if I'm honest, both the spiritual and the secular side of Christmas. And New York seems to offer both at the same time. And guess what? Nashville offers both at the same time. You can find both the spiritual and the secular side of Christmas in just about any city. There's a lot that will happen between now and December the 25th. It will happen very quickly. There's the secular side, there's Santa Claus, and there's shopping, and there's tinsel, and there's office parties, and there's long lines, and there's the malls, the bad traffic, which we already have here to begin with, and you know what I'm talking about. Then there's the spiritual side. And you can enjoy both of these things at the same time, but you have to be careful to not let the secular side of Christmas overshadow the spiritual side of Christmas. It's why we celebrate Christmas in the first place, to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, the coming of Christ into the world, the Son of God, something that we all need. There are 4 words that can be your roadmap to focusing on the spiritual side of Christmas. 4 words for you to remember to not let the secular side dominate and take over. And you know what those 4 words are. It's hope, it's peace, it's joy, and love. This is why Christ came into the world. This is why we celebrate this season. Today we light the candle of hope. At Christmas, there is a sense of hope in the air that's just not present throughout the rest of the year. There's something magical about the spirit of December, the spirit of Christmas, that lifts our hearts and that causes all of us to change the way that we see the world, at least for a little while. Isaiah said, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in the land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. For a child has been born to us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and his name is called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Last Sunday, leading up to Thanksgiving, we talked about fear, especially fear in the aftermath of what happened in Paris, fear in a world of terrorism, where we find ourselves watching the news and picking up the newspaper to new events weekly. But fear not only keeps us from being grateful, like we talked about last week, but fear keeps us from being at peace. But hope enables us to live in a world that is full of fear and full of anxiety. And this Christmas, just like every Christmas, there are people who walk in darkness. Some are unemployed. Some are battling cancer or some other terminal illness. Some have lost loved ones, perhaps to a terrorist attack, or they have a loved one off at war. Some face dire financial situations that are very stressful. Some are living in poverty. Some are going through a terrible divorce. Some are separated from their spouse. This Christmas, there are those who continue to struggle with depression. And when the holidays come, you think, well, the Christmas season can lift people's spirits and take them to a better place, but that's not often the case. Sometimes it's the Christmas season that takes mental illness and makes it worse on people, makes it more difficult on people. The National Institute of Mental Health estimates that there's now probably well over 23 million people, and probably more like 25 million people that struggle with some form of depression. And depression happens on all different levels, right? From severe to mild. And you think that Christmas might help lift their spirits, but often what it does is it does the opposite. It makes life more difficult. And so we have to make sure that we're aware of the people in our lives, the people in our church who struggle during the Christmas season for whatever reason. Sometimes Christmas is a reminder of the way that life used to be, but no longer is. Sigmund Freud was a great Austrian psychiatrist, and he made a very accurate observation one time. He said, life, as we find it, is too hard for us. It brings us too many pains and disappointments and impossible tasks. He said, we're threatened from suffering from three directions. From our own body, which is doomed to decay. From the overwhelming and merciless forces of nature that bring about destruction, earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, you name it. But finally, Freud said that the suffering that comes from the third source is the most difficult, and that is the suffering that we inflict upon each other. It can be the worst and the most difficult. And Freud was never a very optimistic person, but he was telling the truth. This is nothing new. We enter Christmas 2015, all of us with our own burdens, all of us with our own hurts, our own situations, our own dilemmas, the things in our lives that keep us from being able to enjoy the magic and the wonder of Christmas. But life has always had its challenges. This is the way that it was when Jesus was born. Matthew tells us, Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea. It was a world of poverty and heavy taxation. It was occupied territory. Tyrannical rulers like Herod wanted to put all the babies to death. And Herod lies to the wise men. He says, go and find this child, and then when you find him, come and tell me where he is so that I can come and worship him. Well, we know that Herod didn't want to worship Jesus. He wanted to kill him. He wanted to eliminate him. Jesus was a threat to his throne. He saw that baby as something to be dealt with. The literature of that time tells us that the Israelite people lived with little hope for the future. One writer even said this, the world was perishing and rotting and decaying and reaching its end. This weekend I was watching CNN kind of late at night, and they were doing the 60s and the 70s, right? These documentaries that they put together. Isn't it interesting that every decade feels like they are living in the most tumultuous of times with awful things that are happening, and they're usually right. Every era brings its own challenges. The same was true when Jesus was born in Bethlehem. So it's no wonder that Isaiah said, in foretelling the birth of Christ, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in the land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. And it always leaves us asking the question, can Christmas be magical in a world where there is darkness, where there is struggle, where there is pain and hurt and brokenness? And I've always said that it's not how can we celebrate Christmas in this type of a world. It's how we all, every single one of us, desperately need Christmas in such a world. Daniel Migliore is a theologian who wrote a book called Faith Seeking Understanding. It's a great theological textbook, but he talks about Christian hope in that book. He says, Christian hope does not close our eyes to the suffering of the world. On the contrary, Christians believe that God cherishes the world, has created and redeemed the world, and wills to have abiding communion with it. If we hope in life after death, then we cannot be indifferent to the suffering of life before death. He says Christians are to proclaim the gospel and work with imagination and energy for the realization of the many little hopes for more justice and more peace, more compassion in our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and in our world. This week, Christmas cards will start arriving. You done your Christmas card yet? Megan got on the ball this year for us. Those who have it together will start sending their Christmas cards this week. And I love getting Christmas cards. I love seeing and hearing from friends that I've had in college and grad school and growing up, people that live all across the country. And even though we have Facebook, it's great to see pictures of children that have grown, children that have been born. And you know what this is like. You get a Christmas card in the mail, and it often comes with a letter that somebody will write, a note, a long letter. It might say, sending you Christmas wishes. John and I traveled to Italy this fall. Lisa just had her second child. Jack was named CEO of the company. The grandchildren are making straight A's. Elizabeth just got into Yale. David is captain of the football team. It was a thrill for us to chair the Swan Ball again this year. Or this one, Mary William has now joined the board at Goldman Sachs. Susan and Tim just bought a new house up in Aspen. Mark just got promoted at Morgan Stanley. The grandchildren are fabulous, sending our love. There's always been this part of me that wants to see people just tell the whole truth in Christmas cards. Maybe talk about the harsh realities of life a little bit. You know, something like, it's been a tough year. John had an affair. Jack had to go to rehab. Lisa lost her job. Susie had a miscarriage. We called out Johnny on his addiction to painkillers. Mary is battling an eating disorder. Jack's best friend committed suicide in August. That wouldn't be very uplifting, but wouldn't it be more real? People just talked about life the way that life really is, which is hard, challenging. We don't do that, though. We don't like to air our dirty laundry. It's a world of social media where we put our best out there so we can show everybody that life is good on our front. We're keeping up. But beneath the smiles and beneath the pain, or beneath the smiles and beneath the cards, we know there's pain and there's struggle. We know that people hurt and that there's sorrow. And we know that we all desperately need hope at Christmas. The season of Advent is a time for us to remember that God breaks into our world and reaches us where we are in human form, in a baby that's born in a stable to help us face our fears in life. What do we sing in that great carol? The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. I've been reading a number of books lately. I have ADD when it comes to books. I just kind of bounce around. But I have noticed a number of authors that have drawn a clear distinction between the concept of optimism and the concept of hope. Richard Rohr says, optimism is a natural virtue and a wonderful gift of temperament when things are going well, when you think tomorrow is going to be better than today. Christian hope has nothing to do with the belief that tomorrow is going to be better than today. Hope is a reason for foundational happiness, even if everything else is falling apart. Tony Jarvis says hope is not optimism. Hope is not a put on a happy smile, everything will be all right attitude. Hope is not glib cheerfulness. It has nothing to do with pie in the sky. Hope begins with a stark analysis of how things really are. Hope starts with the realization that life is filled with tribulation and things go wrong. Hope is realistic. It recognizes that life is hard, it's unjust, it's dangerous. It ends for us in our death. But hope finds reason to live and the motivation to live well in the midst of our harsh realities. Hope recognizes that we are weak and vulnerable and that we need help from a source that is far greater than ourselves. To put it differently, hope helps us understand that although we can't escape our problems, whatever they might be, there is still joy to be found in the midst of them. Paul writes, "We should boast in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character. Character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint." Hope and faith have always been synonymous from my perspective. Since the birth of Jesus Christ, Christians have talked about hope and the role that it plays in our faith. But as long as we have hope, we have something. When we lose hope, we've lost everything. Why did the wise men travel so far to see the baby born in Bethlehem? Why did they keep going even after they lost the light of the star for a while? It's because they had hope. And hope is not just optimism. It's more than just wishful thinking. It's the absolute assurance that what we believe in, what we long for, is true, and we must be willing to act on our beliefs. John describes the birth of Christ like this: "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it." The true light that enlivens every person was coming into the world. And I believe that now, well over 2,000 years later, we still have a light that shines in the darkness. And it doesn't matter what your darkness might be. It could be fear, it could be anxiety, sickness, broken relationships, a troubled marriage, loss of direction, addiction, alcoholism, financial challenges, depression, scars from the past. Anything else that causes us to reach a state of hopelessness and to cry out in despair. Jesus Christ is still the hope of the world, and Jesus Christ can heal us if we let him. Advent is about the coming of Christ into the world. And Jesus Christ is the light of the world, the hope of the world. And it's on that hope that our faith is founded and sustained. And Christmas reminds us that God is real and God is here. And there's nothing in life or in death that can separate us from God. So whatever state of mind you're in, coming off Thanksgiving and heading into Advent, I challenge you to not miss the spiritual side of Christmas. I challenge you to remember those 4 words that represent these 4 candles: hope, peace, joy, and love. If you can keep your focus on Christ, if you can listen to the music with new ears, if you can actually hear the words to those carols that we sing year after year, if you can open your heart no matter what it is that's happened in the past year or in the past month or in the past week, then you can find the peace that passes understanding, and you can experience the light that shines in the darkness no matter how great the darkness might be.